Amen. So, a couple places I want you to turn. Genesis 37 is really where we're going to start the bulk of the teaching today. But I want to start reading from Revelation. So, the other end, all right, go to Revelation 5. And I want to read just a few verses and just open our study together today by reading Revelation 5 because not wanting to assume that anyone knows everything. And I think that's a safe assumption that no one knows everything. But I want to make sure that we all understand this truth. Revelation chapter 5. And John says, and I saw, and of course, this is his apocalyptic revelation that he was given while he was exiled on the island of Patmos. And John said, I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with seven seals. And I saw a strong, and we know if you've studied Revelation, that contains the coming judgments of God, the coming revelation of the plan of God. So this scroll, seven seals, and it's sealed front and back. I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals. And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look at it. So John said, I wept much, because no one was found worthy to open and read the scroll or to look on it. But one of the elders said to me, do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the book and to loose its seven seals. And I looked, and behold, in the midst of the throne and of the four living creatures, and in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb as having been slain, um, seven horns, seven eyes, which are the seven spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he came and he took the scroll out of the right hand of him that sat on the throne. So the Lamb, I think all of us recognize the Lamb of God who was slain but is now standing, is Jesus Christ. And he is the one that will open the seals, but he is identified as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. All right. I want you to get that in your head before we start today. Jesus is called the Lion from the tribe of Judah. That is the tribe from which he will emerge. Now, go back to Genesis 37. The Genesis 37 story is one that probably almost everyone in here has a familiarity with. The Genesis 38 story may not be as familiar and certainly not preached all that often. And you will understand why in a few minutes. All right. So, the last three lessons of this series are going to be lasered in on the life of Joseph, who is the 11th son of Jacob. I want to take just a moment and kind of review the whole um, paradigm or motif of the seed that we've talked about all the way through this study. In Genesis 3:15, God spoke to the serpent that had deceived Eve, and he said to the serpent, you have bruised the heel of the seed of the woman, but he will crush your head. And that was the promise that there is a seed coming that would come from a very special, unique woman, which would be Mary. And that seed would ultimately destroy Satan. That is we call that the first presentation, the proto evangelium, the first good news, the first gospel presentation, Genesis 3:15. That seed capital S, is going to destroy the work of the enemy. So the seed that God has planned becomes very important and is protected all the way through the Old Testament story, and highly protected in Genesis. And there are many times that that seed could have been destroyed and the promise of the Messiah would have been cut off. So we had Adam, all right, the first man. And of course, they had Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel, and God gave another son to Adam and Eve, and his name was Seth. So then God begins to chronicle the descendants of Seth, which include, these are in your notes, they include Enoch, who walked with God and was not because God took him. Those descendants include Noah, who, remember, had three sons. Noah and his wife, three sons and their wives, are the only eight that are saved from the judgment of the flood on the earth. Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so the three sons come off of Noah, but it's the line of Shem that becomes tracked and followed, which leads us, when you follow Shem's line, to Abraham, which leads us to Isaac, which leads us to Jacob. And today we will see leads us to Judah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And we're going to see how God protects that seed, because that's the promise of the gospel. That seed must destroy the plan of the enemy. So the rest of Genesis now, 37 to 50, is taken up with the descendants of Jacob dwelling in the land of Canaan, their ultimate journey to Egypt, and preparing Jacob's family for ultimately the Exodus, which is what, when we get to January, I'm going to teach through the book of Exodus as well. So that we just keep the story going, all right? But we read 37 and verse 1, Jacob dwelt in the land, so that's his family, in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan, all right? This is the land that Abraham had traveled to, right? Get up from your family, from your father's house, and go. And now the grandson of Abraham, Jacob, is dwelling there with his family. And this is the history of Jacob, 37 and verse 2. So this story is going to be told through the lens of Joseph, who is the 11th son of Jacob, but not just the 11th. He's the favorite son of Jacob. The story begins, he's got 12 sons, and that's how the story begins, is Jacob, 12 sons, and we know he has a daughter, Dinah. And the story of Genesis is going to end with 70 family members who are going to travel to Egypt. Okay, so we're starting Genesis 37 with Jacob, 12 sons, a daughter, Dinah. And when chapter 50 comes to an end, there will be 70 of them. So there will be offspring that will emerge during these last 13 chapters. The section, remember, Benjamin has already been born. All right, that's the 12th son. That's the youngest. He was born. And remember, in his birth, Rachel died. Favorite wife died. And Benjamin is that 12th son. So this section begins in verse 2. Joseph is 17 years old, and it's going to end with his death. So Genesis 50 will end with the death of Joseph. So we're going to get Joseph from 17 to his deathbed. But the story focus is on the 12 sons being transformed and becoming worthy partners of the covenant that God had promised to Abraham. And Joseph is going to be used in a providential manner to save that family. Keep in mind now, there's only 12 sons, a daughter, and Jacob when this story begins. There'll be 70 when it ends. And that's all there is. And it's in that 70 that the Messiah is to come. So it's pretty fragile. All right. It's a pretty small little group of people that God is going to protect because the Messiah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, is going to come out of this family. We're also going to see the story underscore the promise to Abraham that God would bless those who blessed him. That's what's going to happen in Egypt. All right. Jacob, we won't get there for a couple of weeks, but Jacob is going to meet Pharaoh and he's going to bless him because Pharaoh has blessed him. And so we'll see that take place. Um, the first lesson that we're going to look at today deals with the conflict that emerges from inter-family fighting, and second part of the story is intermarriage with the Canaanites. And both the inter-family fighting and the intermarriage with the Canaanites is going to threaten that seed. And again, we're talking very fragile. We're not talking about a million people here, that we're talking about a little tiny family. And if that family gets wiped out, that seed that's promised in Genesis 3:15 is destroyed. Letter G. I've never taught it this way, but I decided to this time because I think it's really fascinating. Joseph and Judah are the two main characters today. All right. And in chapter 37 and 38, in the beginning of this story, both of them are very unrefined. These are not stellar individuals. Joseph, and it's okay. Remember, no one in this, none of these people are saints. God uses people that aren't saints. Aren't you thankful for that? All right. So Joseph is a 17-year-old bratty punk when this story begins. And Judah is a very cold and insensitive man. And they're going to be contrasted. We're going to see a contrast between Joseph, who will refuse the seduction of Potiphar's wife, and Judah, who will welcome a relationship with a prostitute. All right. So we have two ends of the spectrum here. And Joseph is going to say no, because if I did, I'd be sinning against my God. And Judah is going to go out of his way to find a prostitute. And yet, God is going to amazingly use them both. All right. So everybody belted in. Okay. This is a couple of fun stories. All right. So we begin with Genesis 37. Let me read verse 1 and 2 again. Jacob dwelled in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. And this is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. So he is tending the flock with his brothers. He was an assistant to them, specifically the sons of the two handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah. That would include Dan, Asher, Gad, and Naphtali. When he gets home, he brings a bad report to his father. The word report is the Hebrew word debah, and it denotes news that is slanted. There is the word slant in that definition, to damage the victim. All right. This would be a dibah would be when you gossip in such a way that you are gossiping to hurt the individual that you are gossiping about. I can say that comfortably because there's no one in this room that ever has or ever does. So those people that do gossip, all right, that's what I meant to say. So this word dibah is found in Proverbs 10:18. Whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads dibah, slander, is a fool. That's what Joseph did. He came back and he ratted on his brothers, and he slanted his narrative to make them look bad. All right. Verse 3, now Israel, that's Jacob, loved Joseph more than all of his children because he was the son of his old age. Let me just stop there. So I want you to get this picture. Joseph, you all know that proverbial kid that is Mr. Goody or Mrs. Goody Two Shoes that knows his parents think he has never done anything wrong, and he is always able to escape discipline because he is quick enough to rat his brothers out and then stand back as the innocent one. That is what we're dealing with here. That is exactly what Joseph has done. So he goes back to his father with this bad report, and knowing that his father loved him more, and not only that, because he was the son of his old age, he also made him a tunic of many colors. Um, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and they could not speak peaceably to him. So personal favoritism is all over the patriarchs, all over them. Abraham, we have Ishmael and Isaac. Isaac, we have Jacob and Esau. Cain and Abel. All right, we got that going on. And it is again, that favoritism is again going to create strife. The brothers are jealous. They can't speak peaceably with Joseph, who is always evading trouble. Just in time, he gets out of it and points to his brothers, and their anger is growing. Jacob loved him more because he was a son of his old age. And again, even in this, it's another thing. There is this Jewish, and it's not just in the Jewish realm, but we're talking about Jewish here. Primogeniture is the law, the right of succession belonging to the firstborn. Primogeniture. Um, Cain was the firstborn, but the line goes through Seth. All right. Um, and Esau was the firstborn. Ishmael was the firstborn, and the line goes through Isaac. Esau's the firstborn, and the line goes through Jacob. And Jacob, you still see here, he is pushing against that primogeniture, that the right or the succession belonging to the firstborn. And not only, he doesn't even invert the thing, he doesn't go to the son of his oldest age. If he was going to just totally turn it on his head, he would go to Benjamin, but he doesn't go to 12. He doesn't say, well, instead of one, I'll pick 12. He goes to 11. All right. So Joseph is his favorite. One of the reasons he may not have chosen Benjamin is he gained a son, but he lost his wife in the birth of Benjamin. So he gives him what we always call the coat of many colors, and that comes from the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Literally, it is a richly ornamented robe, and the actual rendering makes it likely that it referred to a tunic that denoted loyalty or royalty, not loyalty, that denoted royalty. So it wasn't just a pretty coat. All right, it wasn't just a nice looking coat. It had some kind of significance to it, richly ornamented. This is something you give to royalty. And it seems like Jacob is wanting to pass rule to Joseph. Um, Now, in the end, it's going to get passed to Judah because it's going to be a line of the tribe of Judah. But it's almost like Jacob is trying to push that rule on to Joseph. Now, verse 5. So this is the snotty-nosed, bratty 17-year-old that his brothers hate, who's strutting around with his richly ornamented coat in front of his brothers and who is narking on them every chance he gets. Now, Joseph had a dream and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I've dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood around and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said, shall you indeed reign over us? Who do you think you are, buddy? or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed another dream, and he told it to his brothers and said, look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father actually rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in his mind. So he has these two dreams. And he's not, listen, he's not innocent here. He knows he's got him, and he has this dream, and he rushes out. Hey, guys, you know what? I really am that special guy that you think that you're not too happy I am. I had a dream, and we're out baling hay, and your sheaves bowed down to mine, and had a second dream. The sun, the moon, 11 stars bowed down to me. And it did not win him favor. You understand that, all right? And it actually drew a rebuke from Jacob, like, son, you should not tell your brothers that. Just hold that in your heart. And the brothers became angrier, but Jacob did indeed hold it in his heart. Obviously, that's exactly what happens. At the end, it's exactly what happens. But please do not over spiritualize this. Joseph did not know at 17, this is my destiny. He didn't know that. He just thought it was cool. And he's wearing this really cool robe, and he's under his brother's skin, and he's going to make it worse. That's what's going on here. If you don't see it that way, you're going to kind of miss the beauty, I think, of the story. So that's what happens. Now we move to verse 12. Um, so his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel, again, Jacob, said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, and I'm going to send you to them. And he said, here I am. And he said to him, please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks. Bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. So now Jacob sends Joseph on an errand. I need to know how the boys are doing. And Jacob was concerned about their well being, and Jacob had every right to be concerned about their well being. These guys had wreaked a lot of havoc in the past. I mean, remember the massacre in Shechem, and the circumcision, and all of that deal. So it's not like these boys are pristine young men that never get in trouble. These are guys that have a tendency and a reputation for causing some havoc. And so Jacob wants to know how things are going. And so in verse 18, actually I jumped ahead. Let me read verse 15. So a certain man found him. So Joseph's wandering around looking for his brothers. And he was wandering in the field, and the man said, what are you seeking? And he said, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they're feeding the flocks. And the man said, well, they've departed from here, because I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers, and he found them in Dothan. So they had moved, and this guy gives him direction. Get to verse 18. When they saw him afar off, the brothers, even before he came near, they conspired against him to kill him. And then they said to one another, look, the dreamer's coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him, cast him into some pit, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what becomes of his dreams. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. Reuben said to them, shed no blood, cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness. Don't lay a hand on him. And then the author says Reuben did this that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So Reuben thought, we'll mess with his head, we'll scare him, but we're not going to kill him, and I'll get him out later, and I'll bring him back to dad. So they see Joseph coming on the horizon, and they identify him by their resentment, the dreamer. All right, they don't like him, and that's how they identify him. And they had a desire to kill him. Instead, they end up, by Reuben's suggestion, throwing him in a cistern. It's a dry cistern. So they throw him in a cistern. It's a dry cistern that, again, may foreshadow the famine that is to come.
One of the things that's interesting is Reuben is the one that he's the oldest, and he's the one that is kind of acting like the father here. Is everybody here clearly? Does that sound all right? Okay. Um, what's that? No, I'm good. I'm fine. And it's possible. Remember, Reuben is the one that committed incest with his father's handmaid. So you can almost sense that Reuben realizes he's got some making up to do here. So he thinks, I'm going to be the guy, and maybe my dad will like me better after I return Joseph to him. But in verse 23, it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. And then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. I referenced that already. And they sat down to eat a meal, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And the brothers listened, and the Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So they strip him of his clothes, that richly ornamented clothing, almost like they are dethroning him. All right. And callously, they said he is in this dry cistern, and they eat a meal while he is in this dry cistern, wondering what tomorrow is even going to look like. It kind of foreshadows the soldiers gambling for the cloak of Jesus while he is hanging on the cross. What is also interesting is the next time they have a meal with Joseph, Joseph is going to be at the head of the table, and he is going to have them under his control. All right. It's a powerful story. All right. And can I just pause for a moment and just a little pastoral note? God is still a God of divine reversals. All right. Do never think this is the end, because God can turn that around. Joseph is in this pit, no water. His brothers are having a fine meal, but God has a plan that he's going to turn that around and put Joseph at the head of the table. So now Judah encourages selling him, not killing him. How ironic is it that he says, for he is our brother? All right. We don't want to kill the guy. We just want to make some money off of him. And and so they sell him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels. And Jesus, remember, was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Verse 29, then Reuben returned. So Reuben was not at the meal. Reuben had gone somewhere. Reuben returns to the pit, and Joseph is not in the pit. And he tore his clothes, and he returned to his brothers and said, the lad is no more, and where shall I go? So Reuben is very upset when he discovers that his plan to restore Joseph to his father is not going to work. And so they concoct a lie, verse 31. So they took Joseph's tunic. They killed a kid of the goats. They dipped. Now remember, who's the guy that wanted to sell? Judah, right? Judah's the one that wanted to sell. All right. So they've got to cover this up to their father. So they kill a goat. They dip that. They tear the coat. They dip the tunic in the blood, and then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, we have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not? Now, since we're going to cover chapter 38 as well, I really want to highlight this point, because when you see them together, it's really amazing. So they bring, Judah says, guys, if we're going to sell him, we've got to come up. We just can't tell dad that we lost him. So they come up with this plan and they rip off the coat and they tear the coat and they kill an animal and they put the blood of the animal on the coat. And can you just see them walking back to their dad, acting all sad, right? They're acting like they're mourning, and they've got this torn up, richly ornamented robe hanging over their arms, and it's blood stained. And they're saying things like, Dad, we're not sure. We hope not, but do you know who this robe belongs to? And of course, Jacob knew who the robe belonged to. And the evidence said that his son had been devoured and brutally destroyed by an animal in the wild. And remember, Jacob's the one that sent him out in the first place. And now he loses his son to a cruel predator in the wilderness. And they are able to fool their father. Um, again, the lie is to Jacob. Jacob is what's happening to Jacob. He is reaping what he has sown. Jacob's the one with his mom's help that went into his dad, Isaac, and completely fooled him and completely lied to him. And yeah, I've got hairy arms and yeah, I smell like my brother Esau. So God again is turning this. There's this principle of reaping what he has sown. And so they tell him to identify its owner in verses 33 and 35. And obviously, Jacob says in verse 35, all of his sons and all of his daughters arose to comfort him, which is just a charade, by the way, because they know he's been sold. But he refused to be comforted, and he said, I shall go down in the grave to my son in mourning. And the father wept for him. And now we pick up the story. Now, the Midianites, which are, and I don't have time to show you the maps and go through it all, but the Midianites are a sect of the Ishmaelites. So this is not there's not here they don't, what's the word I'm looking for? They do not, somebody get a good word for me? Anybody have a thesaurus? How about that? All right. They don't contradict one another. That's the word I was looking. It's a big word. Contradict is a big word. All right. So the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, and he is captain of the guard. So we stop at the end of 37, and let me just kind of grab it all. We've got Jacob mourning. He thinks his son is dead. We have Joseph sold into slavery in Egypt, and we have the family in complete. I mean, can you imagine the blame game going on? They start seeing dad mourning more, and everybody's pointing fingers, and Reuben's ticked off because he had a plan to save him. We just have the worst of family dysfunction going on as we get to chapter 38. One would read through 37 and think, I don't think this family dysfunction could get any worse. Let's read chapter 38 and we will find out that we are clearly wrong. All right. So, verse 1, it came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers. He may have been feeling guilt for being the one that wanted to sell his brother. And he visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And Judah married her, and he went into her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Shezib when she bore him. So the family is a mess. Dysfunctional, it's weak, it's impoverished, and Judah's had enough, probably carrying some guilt. He leaves. But Judah is now going to expose the family to a greater threat. Remember, let's go back to what I said at the beginning. God is going to protect the seed. And there's family dysfunction. There's going to be a famine next week. But now there is even a greater threat, and that is the threat of his sinful indiscretion in marrying someone outside of their people. Now, Adullam, where he went, is about 3 miles southwest of Bethlehem. And what we see here is Jacob has less and less control over his family. Since the Dinah incident, when the brothers took over and shamed him, and Jacob is weak. You can his leadership as the father has certainly weakened. And Simeon will marry a Canaanite, and Joseph is going to end up marrying an Egyptian. And Judah, it says Tamar, scratch Tamar out. Judah marries Shua, Shua. All right. And she is a Canaanite as well. So Judah leaves home. He goes to Adullam. He meets Hira, who has a daughter named Shua, and he marries Shua. And Judah and Shua have three sons, Onan, and Shelah. All right. Everybody got that? Okay. We could play Scrabble with those names. Okay. So Judah now has a family. Let's look at verse 6. Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. All right. So son number one, oldest son, named marries Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. I put it in the notes, but first sons in Genesis do not usually end well, okay? You did not want to be I mean, think about it. Cain and Esau and Ishmael, and now we're not told what the sin, and Reuben was in trouble. We're not told what the sin was, but it was wicked enough that God killed him. So son number number one's married. So we now have a widow who has no children. All right. So who is the firstborn, I'm going to write this on the board so you follow this. All right. So we have and has no children. Then there's Onan, and then there's Shelah. Okay, so dies. He's married to Tamar, but there is no offspring, which is a big deal because now there is no one. So the father here is Judah, and Judah needs his name carried on. All right, he needs that tribe carried on, but his first son dies. So there is no offspring. So, verse 8, and Judah said to Onan, you need to go into your brother's wife and marry her and raise up an heir to your brother. All right. So, because it's got to come through the firstborn who's now dead. So now Onan is the firstborn, but we've got to keep this name of Judah, the seed that God is protecting. We have to keep this going. This is the law of the levirate marriage. Okay, you can turn on to page 4. You find that in Deuteronomy 25, verse 5. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family. Her husband's brother shall go into her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed in the name of his dead brother, and that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. So, in other words, Judah says to Onan, you need to go into Tamar, and the first child you have will carry on the name of and ultimately carry on the name of Judah. Does that make sense to everybody? That's what, by the way, that's what's going on in the story of Ruth, okay? Remember the story of Ruth, Naomi, and Elimelech, all right? They have two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they decide when there's a famine, they go to Moab, and the boys are not married yet. When they get to Moab, they marry two Moabite women named Ruth and Orpah. But then Elimelech dies, and both Mahlon and Chilion die. And so Elimelech doesn't have a grandson. and there is nobody to carry on the name of Elimelech, and all you've got is a widow and her two daughters in law who are widows, but there are no heirs, no grandchildren. So they find the relative. Boaz is a relative. He's not the closest relative. There's someone else closer who says, I don't want anything to do with that Moabite mess. And so Boaz marries Ruth to carry on the name of Elimelech. That's all part of the levirate marriage. Everybody got that? Just nod your head if you got that. Okay. So Onan, let's go back to verse 9. But Onan knew that the heir would not be his. And it came to pass when he went in to his brother's wife that he spilled or emitted on the ground his seed, lest he should give an heir to his brother. I won't ask you how many of you knew that was in the Bible, but that is in the Bible. It is read it to you, all right? So Onan knew that the seed would not have been his. If he has a child, that means that it belongs to If he doesn't raise up a child for he would have inherited one half of his father's estate. But if he raises up a child for he only gets a third. And so Onan is somewhat selfish here, and he emits his seed on the ground. Let me read on. So where are we at? What verse are we in? 10. Okay, yes. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also. Don't mess with the Lord in this, all right? So his sensual and selfish act denied his brother a progeny. And the Hebrew text, by the way, that indicates this was not just a one-time act. Every time they had sexual intimacy, this was what he did so that there would be no child. And so to the Lord, denial of the levirate marriage was a capital offense. And keep in mind, it's a capital offense because there's a seed that's been promised that's supposed to come through this tribe, and there are no offspring coming. All right. So let's read the rest of this then. Then Judah said to, think about this. Son number one married Tamar, he died. Son number two married Tamar, he died. And you are Judah, and you only got one son left. Tamar is not getting him, right? All right. She is apparently bad luck. And so Judah said to Tamar, verse 11, his daughter in law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. For he said, this is what he's saying under his breath, lest he also die like his brothers. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. So Judah says to Tamar, I'll tell you what, Shelah's too young to be married right now. So you just wait, go to your father's house, live as a widow. And when Shelah gets a little older, I'll give him to you. And there was no plan to do that because I'm not about to give my third son to her. All right. So now we get to verse 12. In the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. And let me just stop there. I want to take this a verse at a time. So Judah is now, his wife dies, and he is a lonely widower. Sheep shearing was time of parties. It was a time of celebration. And so he needed a little celebration after becoming a widow. And so he heads to Timnah. But in the meantime, verse 13, somebody told Tamar, your father-in-law is going to Timnah to shear a sheep. So she took off her widow's garment, she covered herself with a veil, and she wrapped herself and sat in an open place, which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. So she knew that wasn't going to happen. And so she takes off her mourning clothes and She puts on some fancy clothes, all right, and she moves ahead of where Judah was going to be, and she sits along the side of the road. So in verse 15, when Judah saw her, he's now a widow, he's lonely. He thought she was a harlot because she had her face covered. So he turned to her by the way and said, "Please let me come into you," for he did not know that it was his daughter in law. So she said, "What are you going to give me?" In other words, what's going to be the price for this favor? And he said, "Well, I didn't," he basically, I'm paraphrasing here, "I didn't really plan for this. So I don't really have, I didn't bring my credit card." Okay. It's just, I want you to understand what's going on here. So I'm going to give you a young goat from the flock. But he didn't even have a young goat with him. So she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it? Before I do you this favor, I want something to prove that I'm going to get a young goat." And he said, "What pledge shall I give you?" And she said, "Your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand." We're basically talking about his ID. Give me your ID, and I'll hold on to that. And when you bring me the kid, the payment back, then you get back what belongs to you. And he gave them to her, and then he went into her, and she conceives. She gets pregnant. And then she arose and went away, laid aside her veil, and put on the garments of her widowhood. Let me kind of talk through these points. No family was given to her, so she is deceptively going to make her own plan to build her own family. So she sets herself up as a prostitute. She disguises herself. Judah is a profane fornicator and asked her to let him come into her, and didn't have any money with him. He said, "I'll send you a goat later." He didn't plan because he's acting on impulse. Um, and she said, "What pledge are you going to give?" And so ultimately they agree on the seal, the signet, and the ring. The seal was a cylinder seal. It was worn on a cord around the neck of a prominent person and had their insignia on it. It would be rolled, so it'd have his insignia, and he would roll it in soft clay, and he would stamp his signature on a document. It was his ID for all practical purposes. And the staff was a symbol of authority, and it also was also marked with an insignia. All right, so she goes home back to her father-in-law's place where she's living out, her father's place where she's living out as a widow. And so, verse 20, so Judah gets home and he says to his servants, hey, come here. And he whispers to him and said, "I was, there and met this prostitute, and I owe her a goat. Would you just, under the cover, would you handle this for me? Let's not make a big deal about it, but would you take a goat up there, and we'll disguise it in the book somehow, but you go make that payment." And so Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend, the Adulamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand. He wants to get his cord, he wants to get his ID back. Um, but the servant didn't find her. And so the servant asked the men, "So where's the harlot? Where's the harlot that's always here by the roadside?" And they said, "There's no harlot in this place." So the servant goes back to Judah and he says, "Hey, I can't find her." And the men there say there is no harlot in this place. And you almost get the sense that the servant knows that his boss has been duped at this point. All right. Like, "Hey, boss, there's no harlot there." And Judah said, "Let her take them for herself. Let's not make a big deal about it. Don't want this to get on the news. I don't want to be shamed. And for I sent the young goat, and you have not found her." So in other words, let's just drop it, leave it as is, because I don't want this thing to get out. Seems like it's going to be okay in the short term. Came to pass in verse 24, about 3 months after that, that Judah was told, saying, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot, and she is with child by harlotry." Let me tell you, the text doesn't say it, but Judah is doing a happy dance at this point, because now I'm off the hook. I do not have to give Shelah to Tamar because she has already defiled herself and she has played the harlot and she's pregnant, and Judah thinks he is off the hook and he can find somebody he can trust Shelah with. Okay, that's all going through his head. And but then it gets a little worse than that. Um, he says, "Bring her out and let her be burned." I mean, he's now Mr. Legalistic here. She committed a sin, and she needs to be dealt with appropriately. And what hypocrisy is revealed in Judah. And so, verse 25, she's brought out, and she sent a message to her father in law, Judah, saying, "By the man to whom these belong, I am with child." And she said, "Please determine whose these are, the signet, the cord, and the staff." Remember, Judah stood before his dad with a torn up royal robe that had blood all over it and said, I don't know, but I think this might be Joseph's. Can you identify it? And now he's got a servant holding his signet and his ring and his staff with a message from his daughter in law that he wants to burn at stake, saying, "I understand my sin, but I do need you to know whoever these belong to is the man who impregnated me." Isn't the Bible fun? Don't you? I'm sorry, but so glad it includes that. What a mess. You all know what a mess humanity makes of their lives, and we've been doing this ever since. I mean, we can all sit there being aghast at this, but this story's repeated over and over. This is broken, fallen humanity. It's why we need a savior. And so here she is doing just what he had done a few years before. And verse 26, Judah acknowledged them and said, "She's been more righteous than I, because I didn't give her Shelah, my son." It's interesting. And he never, verse 26, he never knew her again. He owns up to his sin finally. And this is a preparation for what will become Judah's restoration. He didn't know her again. He didn't sleep with her again so as to commit ongoing incest. He did not do that. He was honorable and he recognized his own sin. So, verse 28, so it was when she was given birth that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread and bound it on his hand, saying, "This one came out first." And then it happened as he drew back his hand that his brother came out unexpectedly and said, "How do you break through? This breach be upon you." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So twins are born to Tamar, who had lost two husbands, may even have been a sign to Judah of forgiveness, who had lost two sons. Breakout, Tamar has broken out from under the deceit. And again, the younger prevails. Again, just like Jacob and Esau, just like Ishmael and Isaac, the younger prevails in this struggle with the older. Now, that's a great, great story, but it is heightened in its greatness by Matthew chapter 1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac, Isaac begot Jacob, Jacob begot Judah and his brothers, and Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Amminadab, Amminadab begot Nahshon, Nahshon begat Salmon, Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab, Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David the king. Take that a little bit further, you'll find that 4 women appear in the genealogy of Jesus. Tamar plays the harlot, Rahab the harlot, Ruth the Moabite, and Bathsheba, who is the one that David lusts after, marries, and has Solomon by. All 4 had suspect marriage situations, which actually, by the way, prepares us for Mary, who will be impregnated without being married. She will conceive by the Holy Spirit, but reminds us that where sin abounds, God's grace does much more abound. Are you thankful for that? I mean, no matter how much we mess up our lives, God's grace does much more abound. And can I just point you again to Onan dies. If Shelah does not have children, there are no descendants of Judah. And standing in John's vision is the lion that emerges from the tribe of Judah. 2 sons go down, but God is protecting the seed from which the Messiah will ultimately come. I don't know about you, but I love the fact that God is committed to his purpose and his plan. And no matter how badly we mess it up, he is going to do. He who has begun a good work is going to complete it.